Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear partners and friends. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this session of our series, The World HandCOV'd, and a time when many of you are probably already on vacation, including myself. But this series is not on vacation yet. We have two more sessions. This one is the last but one before our short summer break, and it's the last in this row at the moment where we look at institutions. We've been looking at the CSTO, we've been looking at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and today we are going to look at an institution that has been especially on our hearts and minds over the last month, especially for me and us as Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, the Eurasian Economic Union. Since this was, on a personal note, my last business trip before Corona struck, and now today is the time to speak about this. So welcome to all of you on behalf of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung Belarus and the Minsk Dialogue. We have again an all-star panel that will discuss how the COVID pandemic will affect the Eurasian Economic Union and the outset that it finds itself in, what will change, what might alter by the pandemic, what might be the same, how priorities will be affected or might not be affected, and how all of this translates back into security in Central and Eastern Europe. Welcome to all of you who join us today on Zoom, where we're live, and although we have English and Russian, as always, as our working languages. So if you need interpretation between these languages, please join us on Zoom. And we will have, as always, a panel discussion in the beginning, and later we'll be open to hearing your questions. You can pose them both on Zoom and on Facebook. Now it's my pleasure to hand it over to Eugenii, who will be the moderator for the main part of the discussion today. Looking forward to an intense exchange of minds.
Спасибо большое, Jakub, и традиционные слова благодарности.
Thank you very much, Jakub, and traditional words of thanks go to the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for their partnership in this project, in this series and all other discussions. Once again, dear friends, welcome to our discussion that will be dedicated this time to the Eurasian Economic Union. Jakub has already underlined that we are facing yet another all-star panel, and it is with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce these star speakers. We shall start with a well-known to a Belarusian audience, and actually many speakers here are well-known both to the Belarusian audience and the audience of the Minsk Dialogue, but I think Andrei Ruskovich is one of the better-known people, and one of the important affiliations of him is that he is the chairman of the Belarusian State University. He's head of the chair of Belarusian State University. He's deputy chairman of Standing Committee on International Affairs and National Security of the Council of the Republic of the National Assembly of Belarus. And he's also chairman of the board of the Center for Foreign Policy and Security Studies in Belarus. Thank you very much, Andrei, for finding time in this busy period to join us. Also, I welcome Dr. Elena Kuzmina. Elena, as we have learned, is partially on vacation. Please receive our words of gratitude for finding time to join us. She's the head of a section for Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine of the National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations from Russia. Moving on, Mr. Tony van der Togt. Tony has joined us from the Netherlands. Tony is a senior research fellow of Klingendael Netherlands Institute of International Relations, and he's one of the most active experts in the EU who is writing and commenting on what is happening in the European-Russian relations and, generally speaking, in Eurasia. And that's why it's our honor. Tony, thank you very much for joining our discussion today. And the fourth speaker here is Mr. Thomas Helm. He's the director of the country office in Kazakhstan from the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. He represents Germany here in this discussion, but as I can see, Thomas has yet to join us, and hopefully within the next few minutes he will do just that. Now we're going to follow the standard procedure for all our episodes in this series, and we'll start with very laconic, brief digests of presentations on the publications prepared on the strategic challenges faced by the Eurasian Economic Union. One of these publications was prepared by Andrei Ruskovich, and second one prepared by Thomas Helm. I will ask those people who would like to read more in detail those publications, to go to the webpage of the Minsk Dialogue, where you can read the full text. Now, Andrei, without further ado, I'm turning the mic to you, and you're welcome to start. Sorry for interrupting. It's just that Thomas is writing to me. He says he is having problems in getting connection to the conference. Okay, then we'll solve this with our assistance, but we're not going to make it hinder our further presentation. We'll move to the Andrei Rusakovich presentation. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I hope you can hear me well. Evgeny, give me a high sign if something is wrong with the connection. I'm happy to see all the participants. Once again, allow me to welcome you during this difficult period of time, see that all of you are healthy and well, and most importantly, that you're specialists who continue to shape up an objective view on the Eurasian Economic Union and the global processes in general. Dear colleagues, I will say just a few brief theses on this, considering the 5-minute resource that I have. Number one, the general view on the Eurasian Economic Union. We need to note that this project has been moving forward for quite a while already in different formats, of course, starting from the Customs Union of 1995, then Eurasian Economic Community of the early 2000s, and now as of January 1st next year, we're going to celebrate the 6th anniversary of the new formation of the new title and name of the Eurasian Economic Union. The ground for the Eurasian Economic Union has been put in place, and many processes that were perceived as early as 25 years ago were announced as the principal processes are not completed yet. The Customs Union is working with certain problems too, both internal market and external market. I'm moving to the problems right away now, because the achievements, of course, can be declared as important, of course, but it's all comparable. For instance, some things like single markets of oil and gas were planned to create until the year 2025, but the practice shows that aside from those things that are observed on the international markets, these processes are moving ahead quite slowly. There are problems related to the disbalance of economies, structure of economies of member states of Eurasian Economic Union. The main subject matter of this discussion is about the supranational powers of the Institute of the Eurasian Economic Union and others. So generally speaking, the problems do exist and continue to exist, and most importantly, they are not critical for the integration trend in general. Second thing, of course, we're talking about the Belarusian chairmanship. As you know, Belarus is now chairing the structures of the Eurasian Economic Union this year, and it was declared in January. Belarus declared quite an ambitious agenda of our chairmanship. We were addressing a number of tasks about the single and general policies, as was announced many times already, and shaping up the single financial and energy market, and equalizing the conditions for economic activities, social policies, and other important things. The priority task for the Belarusian government was full lifting of barriers and maximum reduction of exceptions from the markets of Eurasian Economic Union, and prevention of any other forms of barriers. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic has introduced its own corrections. It turned out that the Eurasian Economic Union, just like the other international associations or institutions, proved to be unprepared for these kinds of challenges, and the Eurasian Economic Union has shown the prevalence of country-based policies to respond to the pandemic challenges, which were weakly, at best, coordinated at the international level, which showed different approaches in different countries. Like Russia showed one scenario, Belarus stuck to a different scenario. That is why naturally the borders were locked down, the general people's mobility shrunk, companies shut down, which had delivered a lethal blow on both countries and the Eurasian Economic Union. On the parallel, a new node of problems happened related to the reduction of oil prices. OPEC Plus failed to reach an agreement, reduction on the oil consumption, which infringed on the economic interests of most of the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union. First of all, Russia, reformatting of employment, and again, reduction of the general living standards, changing of people's mentality under the influence of pandemic. These are all new challenges for the elites of member states. And most important thing I need to note here is that, generally speaking, the elites of the member states of EAEU see the overcoming of this challenges only at the supranational level. So speaking at the level of the institutions of the Union, we saw the total deficit of real actions to prevent or respond to the pandemic, but here we have to be realistic. We saw that in April, that first was a political declaration made by many countries, and most importantly, the declaration also reconfirmed the readiness to do the joint work to remove negative consequences of pandemic. And a package of measures was approved, directed at preservation of macroeconomic stability and ensuring the viable needs of population and to maintain the mutual trade and movement of goods. In fact, this declaration was of positive nature, parallel to the different decisions on simplification of access to the markets of those goods which were related to overcoming of the pandemic, mostly medical goods. On parallel with that, there's another thing worth mentioning. Of course, pandemic coincided with two political events. First, in Russia, there is a constitutional referendum or referendum on amendments to the constitution. In Belarus, it's presidential elections, and naturally some of the agenda of the EAEU is hidden under this. But I must say that the leaders of the Eurasian Economic Union member states have undertaken an important step. First of all, approval of strategic policies for the development of integration of this union in for the next 5-year period. This way, they have shaped up quite a clear political message, policy statement, if you will, which reconfirmed their commitment to the main principles of the Eurasian integration. In principle, I must note here yet another important thing, which is important for Belarus and Russia, which is combination or correlation of the Eurasian Economic Union and its development with other integration projects of the post-Soviet zone. First of all, we're talking about here the further development of the union state of Russia and Belarus. Naturally, the discussion of 2019 have revealed significant difficulties which can also affect the position of both Belarus and Russia within the Eurasian Economic Union. But naturally, here we need to speak about this project differently. Whatever can be done separately within the union maybe should not be repeated within the union state parameters. And the discussion of the union state is going to be continued, I guess. And the union state, this project is going to be viewed as a laboratory of integration on a post-Soviet zone. Still open are the questions of the expansion of the Eurasian Economic Union. We know about the decision of Uzbekistan of the possibility of getting a status of an observer state. We see that the union continues to do active work on the external market by building a system of relations with other international institutions and state. We're discussing creation of zones of free trade zones and some projects as well. That is why, considering the post-COVID-19 world, as it is expected, is going to be more rigid, more forceful. There will be less resource, more resource deficient, both financial and natural, and there will be fiercer competition, also technological competition. Naturally, the countries of the region will see a way out of this crisis through the activization of the integration process, integration projects. And this way, the future of the Union is much more optimistic. Another question is that the member states of the Union will have to fiercely compete on the external markets. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andre. Thank you for this balanced start that you started with the problems, ended with the optimistic view. Thomas, hello. I see that you've joined us. You've joined our discussion. Don't forget to use your microphone now. And after that, I'm glad to pass this virtual microphone to you so that you can view your ideas about this publication. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and sorry for joining a little bit late. I'm at the moment in a hotel in Almaty, and first the internet connection was not so good. I hope that you can understand me properly, because I had difficulties with to understand completely Mr. HandCOV'd, because from time to time he was frozen and interrupted, and the speech was even interrupted, I hope. And I had some fights to stand with my Dell computer. I love Dell, I must say. It's awesome. Yeah. When Dell bought good computers, Amazon was still a bookstore and not more. Yeah. So, but we still buy them. Anyway, so I delivered a paper, and I would like to give some comments on the pandemic situation just in a few minutes. You know, from my point of view, still the Eurasian Economic Union is still a torso. To be honest, it is a fragment, because it was an idea in the 90s. From the 90s, end of the 90s, it was the first idea about an Eurasian Economic Union was made by Nazarbayev. Kazakhstan was a poor country at that time. It was before the oil boom. It was end of the 90s of the last century. 1989, 1998, 1999. And then the idea of the Eurasian Economic Union was a little bit forgotten. And it came up again after the occupation by Russia and the sanctions which follow from Europe and the West. And so it was a little bit how to stay in the market at that time and how to sell products. And so it was a little bit in a rush finished then. It was signed in 2014 when and came into effect in January 2015. And it is what it is a customs union mostly. And so in this pandemic crisis, there are a lot of tools just missing, tools which the European Union have to help the countries, the member states. You see the outcome of these really challenging 90 hours negotiations which ended this week about the restructuring program of Europe with a budget from the European Union and with a budget from the member states. The credits, the subsidies which are handed out. The Eurasian Economic Union has not a toolbox like this. And that is, of course, a bit missing. And it's not in the construction. It is mostly a customs union and a political project, but it's not a political economy union as it should be, or as it could be. So, under the pandemic crisis, the data of today are Russia, 790,000 infected people, Kazakhstan, 75,000, Belarus, 67,000, Armenia, 36,000, and Kyrgyzstan, nearly 30,000. When you combine it with other regions, I would say in one sentence, we do not cover ourselves with glory, I wouldn't say, yeah, this way. So there are a lot of regions which are doing better on this. And what you can see is that the Eurasian Economic Union is doing everything individually. There's no common strategy. Every country acts differently. For example, when they start in the process of fighting Corona, Belarus was very late, you know. You know about these videos. The president said in this ice stadium, "Yeah, I couldn't see any virus." Russia even started late with it, and with the lockdowns compared with countries in the European Union. Armenia still flew to Iran and to northern Italy, while other countries took lockdown measures. And Kazakhstan, they started when the first cases approached in Kazakhstan and did a lockdown, but they opened up very, very suddenly and not step by step as countries in the European Union did it. They closed very fast and they opened very fast, and so they get a hit back in that crisis. At the moment, the programs are quite to fight the Corona crisis, and even the economy problems which are connected with them. They are quite different. There are no direct measures done in Belarus, for example. There is a lot of some measures done in Kazakhstan, but they are not comprehensive, to be honest. People, for example, who lose their jobs got 42,500 tenge, which is at the moment less than 100 euros per month. They get it twice when the lockdown lasted a little bit longer. But that is what we call a little bit a drop of water on a hot stone for people who lost their jobs or something like this. And there is no differencing in this. Is you get the same amount of money either if you live in Almaty or if you live in the landscapes. And to live from 42,000 tenge in Almaty, that's nearly impossible. We have, of course, they did cut tax cuts for companies. They saved their air carriers. That is what all countries did. But all in all, to sum it up for the first round, it is like this, that the measures are not coordinated in the Eurasian Economic Union. Everybody is doing or following their own strategy. For example, just mentioning Belarus. Belarus didn't close the border to Russia, but Russia closed the border to Belarus. And so it's different strategies, different attempt, but from my point of view, no coordinated fight in this Eurasian Economic Union, and no comprehensive strategy toward COVID-19. So that's what I would like to mention at the start. I wrote it in that paper. Maybe you read it, and so I think that should be the beginning for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And without further ado, now we're going to move to the comments that will be made by two other speakers. I decided to start with Dr. Elena Kuzmina. Please, can you provide your feedback to those publications and the key theses that were just voiced here? I largely agree with the colleagues here. I would simply focus on a number of other things. First of all, in principle, if we view the EU, each country also made their own individual decision on the COVID-19 prevention measures, and it was not EU that shut down initially, but individual countries. Each national government made the decision. For all other countries of the world, it was an unexpected crisis and a relatively unpredictable situation in terms of the time, at least, how long it will take. And it's comment number one. Second comment is that the Eurasian Economic Union, despite the fact that the attempts of the establishment of such a union cover the period ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, almost right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in reality, the Eurasian Economic Union has been working for much shorter period of time, of course. And indeed, we don't have such tools, or like we don't have common or shared budget, which would be conducive to the development of or establishment of different programs for anti-crisis programs for Eurasian Economic Union in general. What our colleague from Almaty said, we have Eurasian Development Bank and the special Eurasian Fund, which handles such issues. But first of all, the Eurasian Development Bank has somewhat different mandate, which is not linked to the actual Eurasian Economic Union. They have their own programs. Indeed, the Eurasian Economic Union so far is following the path that it's following. But if we look at what has been done in the past, even if we look at the statistics, it became evident right away. The Eurasian Economic Commission provides statistics for the 5 first months from January to May. What happened and what is clearly perceived from the statistics is that by May, the GDP of those countries, of all countries, have not reduced as much as it could have been reduced. Of course, it will go down further and the ultimate results will be learned later on. But if we look at the concrete things in concrete economic sectors in all the countries, the biggest drop was shown, or slump was shown by the industries. With the exception of Kyrgyzstan, agriculture is growing quite well, which also provides its positive result, not only to GDP, but might also deliver a positive result for future development of those countries. Naturally, there was a slump in transportation sector, both public, be it passenger transportation or goods transportation. Goods transportation remained at the same level only in Belarus. In Belarus, Belarus showed a bit more than about the same or even a bit higher percentage than vis-a-vis previous year. If we look at the trade sector, again to a certain extent, owing to the emergency measures adopted, because here we were talking about not only about medicines and medical equipment, mostly we're talking about foodstuffs and some types of industrial products. If we look at the documents of the Eurasian Economic Union, whatever products were given green line for transportation, right away we see an explosive growth there. I think it was the document adopted on April 4th, so the decision was made quite quickly within the Eurasian Economic Union. And yet another trend that we perceived is that trade with third countries has dropped significantly for all countries, much stronger than the mutual trade between the countries. Mutual trade is also going down, but it went down by 2-3%, 4% maybe maximum. Whereas trade with third countries like with China, European Union, the main trading partners of the Eurasian Economic Union, it went down by 15 to 20%. These are the data from April, May. And as a result, again, it will of course play a serious role later on. And yet another trend that was mentioned in Thomas's presentation, but he didn't mention it, about the unemployment. Unemployment indeed has grown considerably, but it has grown mostly because of the Russian Federation. If we look at other countries, the 4 countries out of 5, they don't have such data by April. They don't have data for May. So the unemployment rate didn't grow compared to the previous period, same period of the previous year. But in Russia, the unemployment has grown considerably. You know that Russia undertakes quite serious social measures to counteract it. And these measures are mentioned in the Thomas's report as well. And additionally, now the President Putin is preparing a decree on how they're going to continue with the social measures until 2030. These are the strategic policies for Russia, where 4 out of 6 bullet points are about this social protection and social support. It is indeed a very difficult thing, because it goes without saying that there is a hidden or concealed unemployment. Now we have a considerable number of people who are working half-time. This is also a form of concealed or hidden unemployment that will turn out into a serious problem for the Eurasian Economic Union. Yes, indeed, we have big problems, or rather, we have problems with oil and the profitability, not only for Russia, but also Kazakhstan and Belarus, because of the drop of the oil prices. And there was a serious drop in metal prices as well. People sometimes neglect that. For Russia and Kazakhstan, drop in metal prices is also a serious blow. But as far as the rare earth metal and like precious metals, gold, platinum, uranium, that's what our country is rich in. At least 3 countries out of 5 in the world are in the Eurasian Economic Union. That creates additional opportunities for our Eurasian Economic Union countries, because the prices for these precious metals have grown. So that will be the end of my comment. We'll have a subsequent discussion. I have a number of other comments to add, but so far so good. Thank you. Thank you, Lena. And I'm giving the floor now to Tony van der Togt to also provide comments to what was mentioned by Andre and Thomas. Tony, we're passing the microphone to The Hague now, right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Eugenii and Jakob, and thanks for inviting me to this very important project, I think, when you are discussing the longer term effects of this whole pandemic, which is, well, basically not over yet, but it's good to start thinking already now about the longer term consequences. I have a few points to make after having read both papers and listened to the comments of the colleagues. First, that when we look at the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union and how they reacted to the pandemic, I see a few similarities and a few differences. The similarities in that, well, both organizations were totally unprepared for such a crisis. And for both, the reaction was at first on the level of the national states. Also for the EU, because health matters are mainly in the competence of the member states and not in the competence of the European Commission. So it's only logical that in such a situation, the initial reaction would be on a national basis, including taking measures such as the closure of borders and other measures to prevent the spread of the pandemic. But where there is a fundamental difference is, and I think that is because the European Union is much more integrated than the Eurasian Economic Union as a project, is that gradually the European Union is now getting its act together, both in having a more coordinated approach towards the pandemic and the effects, the immediate effects in healthcare of the pandemic, but also in tackling with the economic and social consequences for the longer term. And we have seen both the actions of the European Central Bank, and we have seen the whole packages which have been agreed by this very long summit meeting which took place over the weekend. We have seen some measures which the EU has taken to reach out to partners, including on the Western Balkans, Eastern Partnership countries, to support them in dealing with the mainly the economic consequences of the pandemic, sometimes also providing medical equipment to deal with the immediate health effects. And this is this is a difference. And I think when you look at the longer term effects and look at what the effects would be on integration processes, then I'm a little bit more doubtful about whether this will increase, let's say, integration within the Eurasian Economic Union. Because even in the EU, what we are seeing, we are looking at the longer term effects of on value change, on production chains. And we are discussing this also as a way to, well, that we have to provide Europe, the European Union, with a certain strategic autonomy. That we should, if we are facing another crisis, that we should not be as vulnerable as we were in, for example, health matters. So in a way, the European Union is also becoming a bit more protectionist, I think. Looking at, okay, this is very nice, these very big value change and production change, but in some strategic areas, we may have to reduce our vulnerabilities. And whether that is going to be done by, well, building up strategic stocks, which is very expensive. So to have all these mouth masks and medical equipment already available for the next crisis, or whether this will be by, well, stimulating local production, so production within the European Union, so that we do not depend on these long lines of production and transport from outside of the European Union, China or otherwise. So this is going to be the discussion, I think, now, whether we have to concentrate more on local production in some areas. Of course, we are all, very open and trading countries, well, the Netherlands in particular, or whether we should at least have some handbrakes, some measures to make ourselves less vulnerable and more autonomous on the when facing other crises, broader crises. This also brings me on, let's say, the more geopolitical context, because we are not only looking at the EU, we're not only looking at Eurasian Economic Union. I think the COVID crisis has provided us with a very clear picture of an increase in this whole conflict between the US and China. And so we have to think about not only what the rise of China means for us, for both of us, actually, with this whole Belt and Road Initiative. What is the effect of COVID on this? Does it strengthen the position of China? Or does it ultimately weaken the position of China in the longer term? We don't know. I mean, the jury there is out. China will also have to cope internally with still a lot of consequences of the COVID crisis. But also in the EU, and I suppose also in the Eurasian Economic Union, what we are looking at is how do we position ourselves between the US and China? This conflict has sharpened, especially the trade conflicts, as a consequence of also this whole COVID crisis. But there is more at stake than purely a trade conflict. I mean, this is also about the technical norms and standards of the future. Especially in the digital sphere, when we are discussing 5G. So who's going to set the standards? And well, Europe may be, let's say, militarily weak, but it's a huge market. And we are a standard setter in a lot of areas. So when looking at the longer term, what the EU is trying to do is to looking more critically at its relationship with China. We want to have connectivity. We don't want to be decoupled like some in the US are arguing. We have discussions with China, very difficult discussions, but still on connectivity. on the European norms and standards, which for a large part are also adopted within the Eurasian Economic Union as technical norms and standards. And while discussing that with China, we are also thinking about, and that's my personal opinion, which I'm already for a long time a proponent of having broader discussions between the European Commission and the Eurasian Economic Commission, especially about these technical norms and standards. And I think we could be partners also in discussing together such norms and standards, especially in new spheres like the digital, with China. Not to, let's say, to have a common anti-Chinese front, but to discuss these things together, because we see some traction also in the discussion between EU and China in this respect. So it's not totally hopeless. It's not that the Chinese are providing us either with their standards or our standards. So there is some way where we can both constructively engage. And whether this is possible also to do it with the US, well, with the present administration, I don't see very many options, but who knows who will become the next president. And maybe afterwards, I don't think, the US would like to patch up this whole crisis with China, but a new administration in Washington could provide more opportunities for us to discuss as allies how to tackle China and how to deal with the challenge which China is posing to basically to all of us, also to the Eurasian Economic Union, to Russia. And it is very clear why Eurasian Economic Union is still rather protectionist also in its relations with China, since you also don't want China to completely take over your markets. So I think if you want to stimulate competitiveness, also within the Eurasian Economic Union, at a certain time you would have to reach out more to global markets. And I think there are opportunities there to link up with European partners, partners from inside the EU, and not necessarily be confronted with binary choices, either the US or China or only China. As a real option for your companies and for your your own process of integration. So I think I'll leave it at that, and so I'm maybe a little bit less optimistic than Andrei Rusakovich, but I see some silver lining on this whole crisis, and we can discuss this further in the debate.
Thank you, Tony. I would like to right away remind everybody who is listening and viewing us here in Zoom and at Facebook that we welcome any types of questions, so please send them in. And now I have a number of questions from my side. This project that we're running in Russian is called Corona Crisis, in the English is called the World HandCOV'd, is focused on the strategic challenges and strategic issues related to, in this case, to the Eurasian Economic Union in the context of the pandemic. So in that respect, I have a number of questions. It is no secret for anybody, and I will put a point on this, that last year and the early 2020, inside the Eurasian Economic Union, there was quite a hot discussion, which sometimes manifested itself in the hot exchanges between the heads of states. And if I'm not mistaken, the first meeting or the summit in this format, in the format of the Eurasian Economic Union, which was organized in the online format this year, has demonstrated quite a serious contradictions between the heads of states. And I will remind you of the quite popular statement or consideration that was shared by some Russian expert community, that Moscow should think twice about whether it makes sense to continue with these difficult discussions within the Eurasian Economic Union, or maybe should they put their stakes on the Eurasian Economic Union for the strategic development, or instead, rather, they should give a much more modest room for the Eurasian Economic Union, like CIS, for instance, Commonwealth of Independent States, but still move them aside or put them on sidelines and instead concentrate on other development priorities in Russia. I would like to hear the opinion from Yelena Kuzmina about this. What do you think, based on the situation that developed in the past few months, those things related to pandemic in the field of economy, social standards, are they changing somehow this discussion among expert community? Because it's quite justified, and Andrei mentioned this as well, that last statements and the most recent documents that we have from the Eurasian Economic Union, they sound more optimistic than before. So how do you view it from Moscow, whether you have pessimistic or optimistic view on this? You forgot to switch on your microphone. Sorry. I don't think, I will give you a more realistic instead of pessimistic or optimistic view. Based on what the heads of states have declared during the summit of the Eurasian Economic Union that took place in cyberspace, in principle, they didn't say anything new. They didn't say anything new vis-a-vis what they said in the past. At least that's what I heard. That so far the political union, and as long as it's political, then to a certain extent, ideologically and informationally, this union, that what Kazakhstan said, that we shouldn't go beyond this economic union. So we have questions about energy sector, and also these questions were discussed, and it became clear right away that they cannot be solved in the foreseeable future, not only from the side of Russia, because Kazakhstan, for instance, fully supported Russia here, because there are some contracts signed much earlier than the Eurasian Economic Union was born. And it was agreed that a single energy market will be established for both power and energy resources. These questions are being discussed, solutions are being found, and if we look at it, the program which was not signed was based it was approved by 95%, that's what our leader said, and most of the questions there have been decided on, that this development will move on. Now, about the COVID-19 pandemic effects, of course, there is a real understanding in Moscow that a huge influence will be exercised by this China-American conflict, and I fully agree with Tony on this. And here, we can say that we need to find a balance, not only between these two superpowers, but the super economies, if you will, but also we need to find a balance to make sure that these countries, to make sure that we follow our own interests, economic interests of the Eurasian Economic Union and the national economy's interests within the EAEU. In principle, again, there is nothing new here because the agreement with China, for instance, was signed and ratified by the Eurasian Economic Union last year, and the text of this agreement is about non-tariff agreement. First of all, it's much broader. It's not related only to trade, and they're not talking about any free trade zone there, but just about the trade rules. Thirdly, I think it is number 3, right? That Russia, if we look at the foreign economic strategy of Russia, it becomes clear that for us, of huge importance is how we build relations with the Eurasian region, and Eurasian Union is the basis that we build on in Russia. We're not saying that we're building only Eurasian Union, that we are communicating only within the Eurasian Union. We can mention different formats, big Eurasia and Lisbon to Vladivostok. You can call it different formats, but in principle, it is quite a serious thing. And here we're not only talking about China and Southeastern Asia, but also India can be included. And as long as for Russia, BRICS and RIC are important components, and for political and economic life, that is why, indeed, perhaps another relatively new aspect for Russia is that in the past 6 months, the COVID-19 situation has highlighted the importance of domestic policies of countries. First of all, social policies, socioeconomic policies at the national level. We're not only talking about the measures undertaken by Russia at the national level. I'm talking about the measures both about overcoming the COVID-19 situation from the medical point of view and from the economic point of view, but also broader format of measures. When we start to build the road that we failed to reach an agreement, I'm talking about the high-speed train road to Kazan and further on to Yekaterinburg. And as far as I understand, in future, it will move on and reach out to Belarus and further to Europe. I understand that we start to promote the formats which need to develop the situation inside Russia. I understand that huge funds are required for that, and huge funds are required for Russia to maintain the Russian economy. Huge funds are required for the Eurasian Economic Union to develop, because the investments, external investments into EU and Russian Federation are going to be reduced considerably because of the global situation, because of the COVID-19. And I understand that the World Bank has calculated that there will be huge cut down on the FDIs all over the world, and it will invariably affect us. And the question only will be how to develop, where to find the sources for development and where to find the investments. And investments will have to be sourced from inside. And it's for a reason that in all our most recent programs, the one which was adopted on April 10th and the one which is expected to be adopted in September, and of the documents that are already visible, here we're talking about the development of own development institutions, that is internal investments. How to make it happen, that's a question. Of course, there will be many questions, and I personally believe that Russia is not reneging on a single of its projects, neither on its Eurasian Economic Union, not on a big, greater Eurasia. I'm talking about China, Eurasian Economic Union, cooperation format, and naturally, considering the current financial and economic situation, there will be some corrections depending on whether there will be a second wave of COVID-19, both in Russia and globally. How quickly the borders will be open, or how quickly possibly it will be possible to move around the world, even within the Eurasian Economic Union, because at the moment, the internal borders of the Eurasian Economic Union are still closed down because of the health situation. The only movement we can see is happening within connectivity between Russia and Belarus. This is the really, in effect, open borders. But as far as other Eurasian Economic Union countries are concerned, the borders are closed, and they keep prolonging this border lockdown. And in some cases, the anti-COVID measures becoming even more strict. Of course, some corrections will be introduced. The corrections are stipulated by the Eurasian Economic Union documents already. You can find them in the Eurasian Economic Union documents. I don't think there will be any more dramatic changes, and whatever is predetermined within Russia by our internal documents, it is confirmed by our documents. And if you listened to or watched a speech of our Prime Minister in Russian Duma, he also made some policy statements there. And at least for the midterm future, a few years ahead, we have more or less clear picture of what is going to happen. Again, largely it will depend on whether there will be or will not be a second wave of the COVID-19. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, it's clear that there are a lot of uncertainties, to put it mildly. I see that Thomas also would like to provide his feedback on this question and share his view from Kazakhstan, right? We mentioned Kazakhstan a number of times now. You have the floor.
Yeah, that was a little bit different when I mentioned that I would like to elaborate. It was that I would like to elaborate a little bit on Tony's thesis, because everybody is interested, and of course Kazakhstan is connected with it. What happens with China in this situation? And I totally agree what he said, that it's not known so far if China will be strengthened or weakened in this COVID situation or comes out of it. But I think it's absolutely clear what China has in mind, and that they think that they are the winner of this game, and that COVID-19 can be a game changer for them. Just let me tell you 5 examples of this. The first time that it ever happened in nearly 30 years of the existence of the Republic of Kazakhstan is that the ambassador of China was strongly asked to come to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because there were some articles published in China that that parts of Kazakhstan belong to China, and that Kazakh people would love to be under the Chinese government in this corona crisis. First. Second, I had a little dispute with one of our team leaders who used to be in Hong Kong before. He's a good friend of mine, but we have different opinions about what happens to the guys in Hong Kong when it takes place. And I said last year, when there was rallies in Hong Kong, that the Chinese wait for the right moment and will get and catch all these guys who organized the rallies. And now it's a time. You see the security law, what happened in Hong Kong, and the only recommendation I can give to the guys who organize the rallies: leave Hong Kong as soon as possible. That is the only thing what I can tell them. The next what we find is, meanwhile, we find military ships in the South Chinese Sea who chase boats from Philippines and others. We hear about overflights for military planes over Taiwan. That is number 4, and number 5 is even in this week we found now that they set the whole Xinjiang region, which is under the watch, in an emergency status. It's every day a new taboo what we find now, and I think China is testing its strengths, and they test out how far they can go. And I think they are the winner of the day. That is what they think. We will see if we will be able to set a stop sign and say, that is how far you go, and you don't go any step further. That is what what is interesting for me to find out in the next weeks and months. Kazakhstan is mentioned a couple of times. Yes, I would also give an answer to Elena in this moment. I think I'm fighting now 5 years in Kazakhstan to find out what is the unemployment rate in Kazakhstan. I didn't manage it so far, because we have a very, very huge unregistered unemployment. You see, getting unemployed in Kazakhstan means an awful amount of paperwork for a little money. And so a lot of people stay just unregistered. And so they do not fall under the unemployment rate. They tell you for years now, it's 5%, 5%, 5% unemployment rate. But besides the ordinary unemployment, we have a lot of people what we called self-employment. Self-employment means they work somewhere on the bazaars for a little amount of hand money, and that's it. But they do not fall under the statistics of unemployment. And that is even the case in this situation now, where a lot of people are de facto unemployed but not registered as unemployed.
Thank you, Thomas. I see that there are some experts among participants from China. So if they want to, they might also voice their position on what has been said. But I would like to address Andrei Rusakovich now. If you want to, you can add something to what has been said about this discussion of strategic prospects of EAEU and its member states because of the growing confrontation between the United States and China. It is obvious that for Belarus, despite the geographical remoteness from China, this still remains to be a very relevant issue. Also, I would like to return to the question that asked Yelena about the balance of negative and positive things. You, Andrei, also spoke about this balance and in your publication. But again, if we try to somehow summarize it and look at most recent agreements achieved here in Minsk, how high is the danger? I would have rather focused on the Russian position, because in your publication you call Russia a locomotive of integration. Nobody has doubt about that. How high is the threat that this call from the expert community of Russia that let us switch off from the Eurasian Economic Union development, rather neglect it and sideline it by putting extra focus on internal policy discussions? Andrei, you have the floor now. Thank you. Within the context of what has been said, I'd like to note one important thing. In fact, both Belarus and Russia, as members of the Eurasian Economic Union at the moment, are starting a new stage in their development. Belarus is on the verge of presidential elections, and anyway, the new governments of new countries are shaping up, first of all, the national policies for economic development. And the greater emphasis here is put on the development of drivers of their economic growth. For instance, Belarus at the moment continues with its strong position with agriculture. We have the head of our state has declared that agriculture will be one of the staples of our economy. IT technologies is another focus. New productions are going to be opened in Russia, judging from the speech of the new prime minister at the parliament. They also have spoken about ambitious goals. Another thing is how these new programs, country programs, are going to be connected with the development and the future problems of the discussed at the level of the Eurasian Economic Union. Of course, it would be great if there's 100% connectivity between them, but it's just wishful thinking. It's unlikely to happen. The trend, which is observed now in the Eurasian Economic Union, if we take mid-90s, for instance, was about the following: gradual development with the overall domination of country problems at the country level. And nobody's going to abandon it anytime soon. Second question is about the Russian approaches. I would agree with Yelena Kuzmina's assessment. Russia is capable of solving all its political and economic questions on the post-Soviet zone single-handedly. But the neighborhood belt and the neighborhood of union countries around Russia is important for its politically, all the integration projects. I'm talking about the union state or the 5-state union, a possible expansion through the Eurasian Economic Union and CIS, big Eurasia, they will continue to exist. Another thing is that how much resources will be allocated for that, how much resources will be given to different states. First of all, how much resources will be made available by Russia for such integration processes. It's one of the biggest questions on our agenda. As for the quite interesting discussion about China and China's place in Eurasian development strategy, here there will be always a double entendre strategy, both from the Eurasian Economic Union and the member states. On the one hand, and they will continue to deepen their cooperation and implement investment projects, ever more so that China insists on them, and they offer these projects to the region. Another thing is that there will be clearly protectionist spirit directed at meeting one's positions. For Belarus and its relations with China, there is one big problem, one big disadvantage, one big negative balance in our trade with China. Trade deficit, and it's hard to rectify. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Andrei. Here we start to receive questions from Artyom Nazarenko, also from Belarusian State University, and the colleague of Andrei Rusakovich. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody who could represent the Eurasian Economic Union Institute or government structures from member states. It is about the prospects of creating single standards in infrastructure of digital economy at the Eurasian Economic Union level. Can it be done in coordination with others? I don't know whether our speakers are following this topic. If whoever is prepared to answer this question, you're welcome to do so. I can partially answer this question indeed. If we rely on the documents which are already adopted by the Eurasian Economic Union, in the most recent documents, if we look at them, it was mentioned that we have made the biggest progress in trade issues and that we're more of a customs union. And indeed, many things also in digital economy, for instance, and in digital standards, not only digital economy, but rather digital standards to a larger extent are described within various trade agreements. First of all, we're talking about establishment of standards from the logistical point of view, digital signature, customs relations. I can even read out an excerpt from the document signed on April 10th, creation of enabling environment for digital trade through expansion of digital documents and digitization of connectivity of logistical operators. Again, application of technologies for registration for import-export goods. And here we're talking about digital signature, first of all, and cooperation, once again, in the customs sector. But we're not only talking about trade here. As long as it is developed to a greater extent, logically enough, they speak about this. Here we have much better interaction. But now it became more self-evident that some sectors which are more promising in the post-COVID period, who have improved their situation in the post-COVID-19 period. These are IT, technology sectors, some forms of high precision production lines, which are also related to the development of this sector. That's what I can say. It's clear that we cannot speak on behalf of many other things because some things are simply not solved at the supranational level, and there are many things which cannot be decided at the supranational level, considering the level of integration, and some things are simply neglected by our countries. Although each one of the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union declares that this sector is developing and should be developed on the priority basis. That's all I had to say. Thank you. Thank you. Before going to the second part of Artyom's question, I would like to ask a somewhat different question to Tony. Tony, once again, you mentioned that you often speak in favor of the dialogue between EU and Eurasian Economic Union, and in the past few years you wrote a number of publications about this, but at the same time we see that, first of all, from the European Union, especially from some of the states of member states of the European Union, there is a total rejection or denial to accept this idea. In the past few months, for sure, European Union didn't have time to even consider such a potential for cooperation with the Eurasian Economic Union. But still, do you think that such crisis situation can become a serious boost to urge and move these two institutions to the dialogue table? Because EU, under the pressure of these emergency problems, and maybe considering also the discussion, which I think was starting last year, remember at the Minsk Dialogue Forum, one of the most active promoters was Mr. Schneider, who spoke about some of similar discussions in Brussels, where he said there is some progress toward the potential dialogue at the technical level, at least. What are the prospects of this cooperation at the moment?
Well, at the moment, of course, the internal problems within the EU and dealing as EU with the consequences of the pandemic, they take precedence over a lot of, let's say, broader international issues. Well, that's just a fact. And with the new Commission, which has posed itself as a geopolitical commission, at least that's their intention, and to be a more geopolitical player. We have started thinking about also rethinking well, the relations with China, but also the relations with Russia. And with Russia, we have these 5 principles for the relations with Russia. I think this will remain. But at the moment, there is a whole process involving also think tanks, European External Action Service, looking at those principles and how to implement them more effectively. And one concerns also the relations with the Eastern Partnership countries. But another very important one is about selective engagement. Selective engagement with Russia. But also you could see if this can be done on the basis of common interests, selective engagement with also the Eurasian Economic Union. So this is, at the moment, these are all elements under discussion. And one thing we are focusing on also is, because what we see is also increased bilateralism. So countries, member states of the Eurasian Economic Commission, striking its own bilateral deals with China, for example, under the Belt and Road, but also developing its own bilateral, more intensive bilateral relation with the EU, specifically Kazakhstan with the Enhanced Cooperation Partnership Agreement, Armenia with SIPA. So what we are in the discussions, one element is to square, so how do these countries themselves see their relations with the EU, and what would they like us to do in the relationship with Eurasian Economic Union, or do they only want to deal with the EU at a bilateral level? So this is still an open question. And discussions, well, originally it was foreseen to have a fundamental discussion at the European Council, well, last week. But of course, this was completely taken over by all of these other issues. So we now hope to have this discussion, which will also have effects. We'll also be dealing with maybe a new relationship with the Eurasian Economic Union. That discussion will take place only in December. But so it is, the thinking goes on, but I mean, there are no conclusions yet. And it also depends partly what I said about what individual member states of the Eurasian Economic Union, also like Belarus, what do they want to get out of this relationship with the EU, and what they want us to do with how to engage or not to engage in which sectors with the Eurasian Economic Union. And yes, this would be an interest-based discussion, and there is opposition. A number of countries are more hardline towards Russia, see the Eurasian Economic Union primarily as a political Russian project, but it also affects, of course, the non-Russian member states, and that's what we constantly keep repeating in this whole discussion. But most important is what would countries like Kazakhstan, Armenia, Belarus, what do they want us to get out of this discussion, to what serves their interest best? Because we would like to, well, to make it easier for them to have good trade relations with all sides, no choosing, no losing, and well, to be able to serve their national interests, their sovereignty as best as possible.
Can I clarify quickly? In principle, what you said, Tony, sounds just like it sounded last year, the year before last. Would that be correct to say that even with that message about a new geopolitical role of the Commission, still the question of the potential interaction between EU and the Eurasian Economic Union remains to be highly political in terms of, in that political sense, as we understood it, of EU versus Eurasian Economic Union in the past. Not that European Commission starts to view Eurasian Economic Union more pragmatically, how this cooperation with the EAEU can strengthen European Union and its geopolitical position in the world. So far, there is no thinking of this nature, right?
Well, what we don't have is a consensus among member states. So there are clear divisions in opinions between certain groups of member states, which tend to see the Eurasian Union as a purely Russian imperial project, and others who take a more pragmatic stance and say, listen, we have some common interests, not only with Russia, but also with the non-Russian members of the Eurasian Economic Union, and we should simply move forward on the basis of our own interests, and find a form of selective engagement which serves our interests best. And then also the China dimension comes in, and that has given an extra boost to these discussions. And what does this mean for the broader relations with China? And yeah, I think, I hope that we will have some little steps, pragmatic steps forward, agreed by the end of the year.
It is with great sadness that I say that we have run out of time already, but just a few more minutes of your time will go over time. We have another question from Mr. Nazarenko, Artem Nazarenko, which sounds as following. How would you assess the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis on the military situation in the Eurasian Economic Union region? It somewhat changes the focus of our discussion, but if any of the speakers is prepared to answer this, I have another more standard question for you before you answer this. We always try to look at some possible recommendations, be it recommendations for the EAEU as an organization or as an institution, or specific member states who are members of the Eurasian Economic Union within this new conditions and environment, the geopolitical environment, first of all, related to the pandemic and its impacts. So as a resume, could each of the speakers very briefly make any potential recommendations, both for the Eurasian Economic Union and for its member states in view of this pandemic? I understand that it sounds too general and too vague, and one of the recommendations which is self-evident for all, not only for the Eurasian Economic Union, but any other integration institution, is to continue with the integration project, which through the synergy effect will ensure good results for others, but maybe you can come up with something less self-evident. So let's go in the same order as we started. We'll start with Andrei Rusakovich then. Thank you very much. Perhaps I will repeat what I've already said. It is the balance between national development strategies of member states of the Eurasian Economic Union and the development strategy for the development of the Eurasian Economic Union as a whole. Here we need to set forward more ambitious goals. I believe that if we decide to reach new frontiers here and develop the capacities of member states of Eurasian Economic Union, and here we need to rely, first of all, on new technologies, new sectors, and the second question on how feasible this ambition is. Thank you very much. Thomas?
Yeah, first of all, when it comes to Kazakhstan, I have to say, it does not make sense to me to let one quarantine follow the next quarantine. What is happening at the moment? We need a strategy which combines issues of taking care and security on health issues, but also to take into account the needs of the economy, the society which is suffering, and the education. For example, when I look to Germany, more and more universities say, we will do teaching 50% online, 50% offline, things like this. In Kazakhstan, they close completely down the semester and say, okay, just online semester for until the end of the year. I think the damage in education is so big. All the freshmen coming to university at the moment, they have no clue about academic life so far. And we have to find a solution, not only these perspectiveless lockdowns, we have to find solution which also takes into account the economy needs, the needs in education, and the society needs. And when I come to the European Union, of course, because when we go on like this here, we will have a big damage in the economy and in the society. And then it's a question, where does the money come from to recover this? And the money should not come only from China, because then we have new dependencies. And so, coming to the European Union with the last sentence, it's a question about if we manage it in the European Union to enrich the connectivity strategy, which is so far a little bit a piece of paper with budget. Yeah, and with a real budget which brings perspective to this region, to countries like Kazakhstan and so on, because only the state of the connectivity at the moment, connectivity strategy, that is not enough to give an answer to the new Silk Road and to the Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you, Thomas. Elena, you have the floor. If I may, I believe that if the Eurasian Economic Union intends to implement at least the plans that they have agreed on at the moment, if they will find all these financial and human resources to do that, then it will be the biggest and most important victory over coronavirus for us. The documents that we have discussed contained a lot of good statements. And the September strategy also will create additional opportunities for subsequent integration and development. The only thing to add here, I fully agree with Andrei Rusakovich that we need to develop those sectors, high-tech sectors that we can develop. We don't suggest developing everything at one fell swoop like other countries of the world maybe, or other integration environments, but the bigger emphasis should be put on SMEs, because overcoming of these social problems that the COVID brought in largely depend on the role of SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprise. Naturally, here we need to coordinate national programs, first of all, in this kind of engagement to maintain and strengthen the small and medium-sized enterprise, because they were struck the hardest and will continue to suffer if there will be next waves of COVID-19. Thank you. Thank you. And finally, Tony.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I fully agree with what Thomas has said about a connectivity strategy and that we need a bigger budget to make a difference. It is, after all, the European answer to the Belt and Road Initiative. And well, Kazakhstan still has a special place in my heart since I was posted there in the late 1990s, so still keep some good memories. About other issues, I think we should make a serious effort, and whether that is on the level of Eurasian Economic Union or more, let's say, on a bilateral level between the EU and member states of the Eurasian Economic Union, to try to work more closely together on health issues, also in the context of the World Health Organization. I think that is very much needed nowadays, and the European Union is trying to make an effort and to contribute to the WHO organization, because after all, we are still in the middle of this pandemic and we don't even know whether there will be a second wave. Other areas are about, well, we still think about greening our economy, about the Green Deal, about digitalization of the economy. I think also there we should try in a pragmatic way to find platforms for cooperation, and well, whether that is on the level of the Eurasian Economic Union, whether it's in the competence of the Eurasian Economic Commission, or whether we could do this by working more closely together with individual member states, specifically our partners in the Eastern Partnership. Well, that remains to be seen, but I think these are issues where we should cooperate, not only dealing with the immediate effects of the pandemic, but also with now the longer term effects, and using this to, well, restructure our economies to make them more green, more sustainable. And do this not only by ourselves, but try to broaden cooperation in these fields as much as possible.
Thank you very much. Once again, I would like to thank once again all our speakers for their time and readiness to share their ideas. Before we say goodbye to each other, we shall summarize the results. There are a lot of useful ideas shared today, generally for our project. Thank you very much. We're going to actively use it by the end of the year, when we shall prepare the final papers or releases for this project. Very briefly, I will highlight some of the theses. Of course, they're not exhaustive, or much more ideas were voiced. And I will remind you that there is a very good publication prepared by our authors. I invite our viewers to read them on our site. So we have mentioned that the Eurasian Economic Union proved to be totally unprepared for these challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Neither were prepared for COVID-19 pandemic all other integration organizations like the EU. So it's not like a negative characteristic for the Eurasian Economic Union. Another question is that how countries and the Eurasian Economic Union institutions can adopt themselves to the new realities and find maybe sometimes unique opportunities which will prove to be beneficial in future. At the same time, the long existing question about the national and supranational within Eurasian integration has become ever more relevant because of obvious reasons. Similar thing happened within the EU, maybe because of the recent establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union is taken more emotionally, both at political and expert level discussion, but we need to show certain understanding, but it doesn't negate the need to find possible solutions. In the same way, it relates to other problems which people keep hearing about, like common markets and the discussions conducted on the one hand between Russia and Kazakhstan, on the other hand between Belarus and Armenia. Due to well-known reasons, countries of different economic structures and different interests. Again, pandemic has made this more acute and pronounced, not the pandemic itself, but rather dropping energy prices. So we can make a long-term conclusion that without any movement forward on this subject matter, Eurasian integration will continue to slowly stand still. Two last thematic blocks that we covered: the EU versus Eurasian Economic Union. We see that the Eurasian Economic Union continues to show high interest to this subject matter, despite the fact that many public officials are kind of frustrated about this so far. It's not clear whether the EU, within the context of pandemic and other processes, which one way or another will push the EU to be more active in its international positioning. So far, it's not clear whether there will be a document or agreement to start at least a selective discussion with the Eurasian Economic Union. And the very last thing, what awaits Eurasian Economic Union within this new hot conflict between United States and China? It's the chief question of our project, and in terms of diplomatic and geopolitical issues, it will remain to be a key subject matter both for the Eurasian Economic Union and the EU and the whole world. But at least we managed to agree that in future, this conflict is recognized and is being assessed both in terms of the challenge to the Eurasian economic integration and total uncertainty. The key question will be how the Eurasian Economic Union member states within this union and in cooperation with the third countries will be able to find a perfect balance within this conflict between the United States and China. Basically, I would end our seminar on this rather abstract note. I would like to thank all our speakers and thank all the viewers of this discussion in Zoom and Facebook. The day after tomorrow, maybe, we're going to have a press release, or rather we will edit this video feed to make it more visually appealing, and we'll post it on the web pages of Minsk Dialogue and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. You're welcome to review them again. I would like to thank our partners, represented by Jakob Willenstein and other colleagues, and also would like to thank our interpreter, who have shown patience to such quick speakers as myself. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening and see you next time. Next week, we're going to speak about the United Kingdom.